Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Sefton and welcome to this special GI webinar sponsored by Endava, how having your code assessed can save you millions. There's something here for everyone, I think, whether you're a CEO, CTO, investor, product manager, developer. So by the end of this event, you'll discover how this consultancy service can help with analysis secrets that have helped other industries such as fintech become more efficient, how the service can uncover risks in your code, and most importantly, and we keep talking about this, save you and your games coding teams time and money. We're going to hear a presentation very shortly from Dan Danchu at Endava. Then we'll have a panel with industry experts that will answer some questions about the process, but also answer your questions about Endava code assessment. So if you have any questions or if you think of anything throughout this webinar, please just pop them into the Q&A bit below and we'll answer them later on. Right, we'll crack on and I'll hand you over to Dan Danchu, who's the VP of Intelligent Automation at Endava. Over to you, Dan.
Hi, everybody. Let me start off by introducing Endava. We are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and for the last 2 decades, we've been helping companies rethink the relationships between people and technology by taking full ownership or partial from the journey of going from ideation to production. Historically, our customers have been in the financial industry, but recently we have presence in other verticals. In the game industry, we've been for the last 15 years doing end-to-end development, tool development, or team augmentations for various companies. My name, as you heard, is Dan Danchu. I'm the VP of Intelligent Automation. And that means that I normally help computers understand what is intended for human beings, but also I spent a considerable amount of time doing the reverse, helping humans understand what is normally intended for machines, meaning code. And just because this title is not a catchphrase, I want to share a story in which, with only a few days of analysis, we've managed to show investor that is not worth investing into a company because of the risk that is coming from that company's code base. And that's not normally the case. In most of the situations where we are doing work in technical due diligence, we show there are no red flags coming from a company's code base. So I want to start off today by going a bit over what I consider to be the state of gaming in 2023 as a way to set the foundation of why I see software assessment important for the gaming industry. Then we're going to move into why assessment is needed and how it is being done. And of course, afterwards, the panel discussion as shared by Jamie. Okay, so we live in some interesting times. For the last 3 years, we've had the pandemic, 1 year since the start of the invasion of Ukraine. Every day I see new articles about how we have a recession pending, both actually in all the industries, going from real estate to technology. Yesterday, I just saw an article about how Meta is laying off another 10,000 people. And last week, we just saw how in a couple of days, SVB managed to go crashing down. Now, for the game industry, recessions and crisis was not necessarily having a negative impact. But in recent studies from last year, the vendor deals have gone down with over 30%. Gaming in the public markets, similarly, something to going down something like 35%. And that means that companies in gaming will have to do a lot more in order to convince that they're worth investing into. Monetization in mobile has definitely become harder with what's happening in the privacy transparency, both on iOS and now coming on Google. Recession also means less money spent on advertising and hence less income coming via ads. And just as regulators are coming down hard on the players in the gaming industry, like the deal between Microsoft and Activision, or the fine that Epic got last year of over 500 million. So it's definitely becoming harder and harder. At the same time, streaming companies are getting into gaming as well, like Netflix is building up a library of games. I'm quite eager to see what other players will be doing in this area as well. At the same time, I'm thinking for the consumer, thinking about the consumer and the fact that how is he going to spend another $10 on a skin pack when he just spent considerably more on his weekly groceries than last week or last year. And not only that, the experience of his game experience is becoming completely different from what it was happening 10 years ago when he was buying the game on a disc. Now all the games are online. He already probably paid for the game, the subscription on the console, and so on. And the games are now considerably more buggy, and they're actually SaaS being delivered incrementally. And that brings me back to what Endava can do in gaming, what we've been doing for a while. We've done running games, running live games, doing migrations between engines, but at the same time, we've been looking how new technologies can improve the experience for the game, but also how it can improve the efficiency for developing the games. Like, for example, the white paper that we wrote last year on how generative AI could be used to make more 3D model creation more efficient, and the recent videos that Robin has been releasing with how to use various XR technologies. And additionally, there is this new thing that we've been doing for many years for other industries, and why we are all here today, which is software assessments. Now, we've done software assessments for many companies in a lot of industries, and we've discovered that actually software assessment is applicable to all industries. And yes, here game is as well. This is the workload on which each industry represents the number of code bases that we've reviewed, or systems that we've reviewed. And as I said, it is applicable to all industries because it helps decision makers answer the same type of questions. How can I improve my delivery pace and reduce the number of defects? Or do I need to continue to invest in modernizing this system or completely build a new one? As an investor, do I want, it can show me if I want to invest this amount of money and how much it can cost me to run it over the next couple of years. And this is because, like in all industries, technology is becoming a competitive advantage. And actually, the code base is critical to the business. The code base is always under heavy development, and the development has started many years ago. And with what I know from the game industry, this is usually the case. Now, when we want to answer these type of questions, we're looking at why is there a slow pace? What is making changes hard, and why do we need to have changes scattered in files over the entire code base? What is causing the integration nightmares between two systems? Why is there excessive bug fixing, and a lot of effort goes into fixing the problems that we introduced after creating a new feature? Or we are looking into what are the weak spots in the code base, and we're getting insights into what the severity of these weak spots. At the same time, we look at how the team knowledge is distributed over the entire code base, and it's still amazing. Although we all know that we shouldn't be creating key persons or letting key persons become key. How many systems have these kind of persons? And therefore, we're looking at where are areas with weak knowledge over the code base, and how knowledge is segregated over the entire team. We do that by getting information from the source code itself, by looking at how changes are being performed on the code. So what's changing from one version to another, and also bringing in additional metadata like operational data, like where is the budget for these changes coming from, supplier teams, value chain mapping, but also things like information from the task management system. And we put all of this together in a knowledge graph that is able to help us to answer questions about maintainability, development patterns or anti-patterns, how the team and knowledge of the team evolve over time, the source, open source dependencies, and even test automation. Now, this is not going to replace the way that we traditionally do software reviews or audits. And it actually means that we're working in conjunction with architects, either from Endava or from the client company, where they are talking with and having interviews with the stakeholders, going over documents, and we look at and analyze the metadata that is coming from all the sources I said before. They give us context and assumptions that they have, and we provide facts and findings for their questions. And we do this normally in an iterative manner, having several sessions over a couple of weeks. Now, let me give you a few examples. Like this one, the first one is a comprehensive health check for a company, where we looked at a code base that had over 10 years of history, but only the last 2.5 were available, developed by over 200 developers on Java and web technologies. Now, at the end of the audit, the client discovered subtle dependencies that they were not aware of, and which were actually increasing their maintenance costs, but also discovered that the developers were not properly allocated to the various subsystems, and that created significant knowledge gaps that make the development slower. And some of the key findings were that tens of huge, complex, heavily changed legacy files concentrated most severe quality issues. So they were actually able to see which files were causing them, so making them top priority for refactoring. What components are frequently changed together? And yes, those are things that you wouldn't want to trace by yourself, but we bubble up the data so that you can see it at component level. They saw how many tasks actually affected the same files across the many components, and the fact that retired or people that were not available in the team anymore limited the knowledge that the team had over the code base, making apparent the areas in which they would have to do knowledge transfer between the team members so that they can better cover it, changes. In another example, the one that I actually mentioned at the beginning, for a technical due diligence, we were looking at a system with over 20 years of history, about almost a million lines of code, and in various technologies. Now, I also wanted to share what were the outputs of such software assessment, where we had a very comprehensive report with executive summary in which we went into details on the technical depth, the maintenance cost, and the risk associated, but also more detailed appendix with visual graphics to better explain the reasoning from where our conclusions are coming from. We managed to reverse the buy decision in just a few days and objectively dismantle the false claims of the maintenance cost. And as example, here we can see that two very highly complex files, and just the first one had over 20 very complex methods with over 500 lines of code, and one method had 11,000 lines of code with excessive cyclomatic complexity. Not only have these files been heavily changed, but all of the changes to these files are actually being done by a single developer. One of the veteran developers in that system had almost all the changes of the legacy files, and newcomer developers were actually doing almost no work at all on the legacy code base. In another example, we actually helped an Endava team take over the system for maintenance, for application management. It was a huge system developed over 20 years, 13,000 files, and over 3.7 million lines of code. Now, as I said, we assisted the development team to gain the client trust that we are the right partners for them to take over this maintenance. And at the same time, we provided the team valuable insights to understanding the code base they were about to take over. Now, this happened over a couple of weeks only. The initial part, it was 3 or 4 weeks only, and that during that time, we not only worked together with the team, but created a bunch of deliverables that was able to show the company that we are the right partner for them. We've had several reports at the same time, some exploratory graphs of over 10,000 nodes that the team was able to use to discover how the code base is organized and the relationship between capabilities, features, screens, and database entities. So they were able to filter out what they were interested in, see how that how the connections between the various pieces of code exist because of this the connections. Now, how is software assessment done? It starts off by extracting information from the code base. As I said, we're looking at the source code, at the code changes, and additional metadata. For that, we have a tool which is actually open source that allows us to extract that information, and a technical engineer from the client is able to run that with minimal preparation. There is no installation required. It runs locally, and usually it's up and running within a few minutes. Once that information, that metadata is extracted and doesn't contain any line of code, is being passed to us. So everything is text-based. It can be inspected to see that there is no proprietary information inside of it, and that gets fed to us. We load it into Chronos, which is our tool for doing the analysis, and where it is interpreted by a consultant. And at the end, of course, we delete everything that's coming from the customer in that assessment. Once we are finished, we create the assessment report that is presented to the relevant stakeholders. From a timeline perspective, there is after the kickoff, there's a session for doing the data extraction where we work together with the designated engineer. Once we get the data, we do some sanity checks, and we start to validate it and discover findings incrementally that we share. Normally, there is an interim session where we present the findings, we get feedback, that gets incorporated into the final report. And from a duration perspective, that depends on the scope. So how detailed we want to do the assessment, what is the size of the code base that we analyze, and the sources of additional data that we have to analyze. But usually, although usually it's somewhere around 4 weeks, we have shorter quick scans that go for 1 to 2 weeks. But it can also, for multiple systems, it can go up to 8 to 10 weeks. In most of the situations, just a few days after we receive the data, we start having findings that normally pleasantly surprise our stakeholders, and they find relevant. Software assessment is not a simple tool, although it does use tools, of course. It is a consultancy service. Usually our reports have various levels of depth. We in the top left, you have a matrix showing the findings and their impact in amount of dollars, rough amount of dollars on maintainability, changeability, and so on, or explaining in details what is the impact of certain finding. And then for the technical people that are interested in the details and explanations, we have visual insights that support the finding. In most of the situations, we also provide a read instance of our tool, where technical people can go more in depth in understanding the data behind findings themselves. That brings me to our conclusions, but as part of the panel, I'm pretty sure that we will be covering this. So over to you, Jamie.
Good stuff. Thank you, Dan. Okay, we're going to add our industry panelists now, and I will introduce them one by one so they can tell you a bit about themselves and how they are connected with this Endava code assessment. So we'll start with Chris. Chris Wright. Hello.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, everybody. So I'm Chris Wright. I'm a technical consultant at Endava. Previously, I've been in the games industry for about 25 years. I was co-founder of an analytics business back in 2010 called Delta DNA, which some of you might know. That company was acquired by Unity. I was CTO of that company, and it was acquired by Unity in 2019, a few years ago. And then since then, I'm involved in an ad tech company. I do some consultancy, and I work for Endava and do some of these technical consultant projects.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, next up, Roxana.
Hi everyone, really pleased to be here. I am Roxana. I'm currently a delivery manager for Endava. Started in Endava almost 10 years ago as a software tester. And yeah, as a delivery manager, I manage also commercial projects, but I do manage the delivery of the software assessment service. So
Super.
I'm here to answer any questions that you might have.
Brilliant. And yeah, I mean, if you've got any questions, please pop them into the Q&A. Next up, we have Dave Sharp.
Hi, my name's Dave Sharp. So my involvement with games industry dates back to the late 80s, and I worked as a technical team member initially, and then I worked in publishing right through the 90s and into the start of the 2000s. So I worked for companies like Acclaim and Virgin and Interplay, and ended my games involvement at Viacom. Since then, I've been working in the investment and due diligence kind of spectrum, which is how I got involved with Endava, which is 9 years ago now. So I do investigations on behalf of Endava on gaming and non-gaming related projects. And in this particular context, I've done probably about 25 software assessments now with the Endava team over the last few years.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. Next up, we have Hamza. Hi, Hamza.
Hi, Jamie. Really good to be here. Quick introduction. I have worked as a chief strategy officer at the UK, one of the larger UK games companies called Jagex. And I'm also a consultant at Endava with a strong focus on the games industry. So really good to be here and to be speaking to everyone.
Good stuff. I think we've got an issue with your mic there, Hamza. So I don't know if you want to wiggle any wires or anything, but hopefully we'll sort it out. But yeah, thank you for that, Hamza. That's great. Thomas, hello, Thomas.
Hey, Jamie. Yeah, I'm part of Endava VP Extended Reality, so heading our VR, AR, 3D, mostly industrial focused stuff. But I've been also part of the games industry for quite a long time. I had a indie game studio for 7 years, and then 2015 joined Endava, and yeah, built up this this part of the company. Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. Thank you, Thomas. And obviously you've heard from Dan already. So we'll crack on. I think that I'm going to ask everyone one particular question that has come up as from the presentation that we've just seen. But if you've got any questions, please pop them into the Q&A and we'll come to those afterwards. So I'm going to start with Hamza. Let's see if the mic's working a bit better. But
can you hear me now? I'm trying to
I can. It's still a bit Dalek-esque. But we'll stick with it because we can still hear what you're saying. So I'm going to ask you, because obviously you were Chief Strategy Officer for Jagex on RuneScape, which I'm sure everybody here knows. So what did you learn while working on such a huge title about the value of software assessment?
I think one of the really cool things about RuneScape is that it is 20 years old and it is a live game. So it keeps on getting updated every month, and it has a long tail of users, and it is a thriving community that keeps on asking for more. And now, around 20 years ago, a lot of the devices and a lot of the software standards that we see today did not exist. A lot of the things that we now take for granted, like massively multiplayer server management and basic artificial intelligence. All of those are available today almost off the shelf. Had to be written by jagex 20 years ago by hand, right? So, and the same sort of code has been adapted, has been going forward from there. And so, as the franchise continues to grow and it needs to go on more modern platforms, the visuals need to be upgraded, the gameplay needs to get tweaked. A software, having that software evaluation is critical from a management perspective, as you need to know where to invest in. You do not want to upgrade everything in one go, because that is never really a good idea, and it is usually financially prohibitive, let alone operationally prohibitive, because you have to shut down things for long periods of time. So doing a software evaluation and really knowing the areas that you should, areas of risks, areas of opportunity, and being able to make those decisions with clarity is incredibly important. As Dan was saying, games no longer have a shelf life of 6 months. They now have an average shelf life of 6 years, and the world is moving very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Hamza. I hope people could hear that. It's still a bit of interference on the line, but hopefully people heard what Hamza was talking there about. I mean, 20-year-old code. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable, really. But Roxana, I was going to ask you about the difference between kind of the CEO product manager side of things, the business side, and the CTO game lead kind of technical side of things. And do you find that you have to convince the business side of the company that you need to spend money to save a lot of money?
Well, I think it's a good sign that we are seeing both sides reaching us. It's true that the majority of them are on the technical side, so mainly the CTOs. But we do interact with the product part too. There are two different perspectives. Like the product manager would like to understand maybe why do they have like this slow development pace? They want faster time to market. They want to be there fast to respond. The CTO will look more on where to invest and so on. I think the important thing for us is to get them at the table, explain what we do, and what is the idea. We don't come to judge, we don't come to point fingers. We come to help them identify some risks and also help them with an actionable plan on what to tackle, what has the biggest impact, and what will help their business after all.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
It's quite funny in the beginning when we have all these conversations, but why? But once we all understand we want the same thing, we want to help, they want their business to thrive, it's we don't have any challenges performing this.
Good stuff. Brilliant. Thank you, Roxana. I'm going to ask Chris now. Chris, you have experience of a sale of a mobile game that was directly affected by having technical issues that the Endava software assessment could have solved, really, could have picked up. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. So when I was at Delta, so obviously Delta being a big analytics business, we did a lot of work. We had a whole kind of consultancy side where we would help companies look at what was going on in the game, and quite often actually going in with points where a company was wanting to buy a game, let them go in and understand the data, how the game was performing, and also do comparisons. One of the great things was that we had this huge database, so we could do comparisons and see how the game compared to the market or compared to competitors. So we were quite often brought into some of this due diligence process and actually kind of looking at games. And there was one specific one where it was a mobile game, it was an MMO. We went through it looked really good. Actually, the stats looked amazing, which was great. But And they did the buyer in the end did their own technical due diligence. They went in and they evaluated the code, came away and said that yeah, and went ahead with the acquisition. It then, because we stayed involved, because we did some kind of ongoing monitoring, and we were actually in with the company itself. It then transpired that there was some fairly obscure but pieces of code in there that caused some real quite big problems, specifically around the data actually, and the way the data was being collected, and it caused the company quite a lot, the buying company quite a lot of issues. And in the end, what it meant was the company that was selling got how some of the money didn't actually flow through. It cost both sides quite a lot, and it was one of those pieces of analysis that actually this would have been perfect for. It would have actually got in there. It would have found those pieces of that kind of minutiae of analysis that gets to the core things that is so difficult if you're doing. And I've done lots of kind of technical assessments and tech due diligence, and you just can't get to that at that level of detail. You're great at looking at the overview of how the core structure is and what the team is doing, but getting down to those core pieces of analysis, this really helps. And something like this would have picked it up, and it would have saved huge amounts of money from both sides. And so it's really important that you use both. You got to have both sides. You got to have both the actual people looking at it and understanding that level of expertise. But there is things that a technical tool like this just picks up that you just can't get from even for the most knowledgeable CTOs in tech due diligence.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm seeing that we're starting to get questions in, which is great. I'll come to the questions from our audience in a second, but I just want to ask Dave, because Dave, you obviously have a great deal of industry experience, and is this code analysis something that the games industry should be embracing as soon as possible?
Yeah, so if I think back over the last kind of 10 years of working with Endava, and then looking at the circumstances you find in other verticals like fintech, the thing that you really realize is, one, games are very complex in terms of size of code base, and certainly in terms of complexity. The only other place that I've seen that level of complexity really is in fintech. So when you start to apply the code analysis tools and approaches to a lot of the fintech systems we've looked at, it very quickly narrows down on bottlenecks and code duplication and overly complex code and cutting and pasting and all the other things that are really kind of troublesome. And it's just, it's quite a cathartic almost kind of process to see the tools narrow down on almost to, possibly a programmer's bad habit, or something that's kind of, we call it anti-pattern. So, it's not helping in terms of the way that software is developed. And I think the correlation in certainly in complexity between fintech solutions and gaming solutions is quite close. And you can see the cause and effect when we do a fintech review. We can quite easily and very quickly narrow down on a lot of the problems that the fintech guys are having, to the tune of millions of pounds in terms of saving on maintenance costs and removing bottlenecks, and certainly and particularly with technical debt management, identifying technical debt and then managing it so that you can either move forward or managing it so that you can remove it. And I think it's just it's a discipline that would transfer or translate very well into gaming. It's just taking that initial step, understanding why you're doing it, having the political will to want to do it, and then applying it to the process that you're following internally. So yeah, I think there's a lot for games companies to kind of benefit from the software assessments.
Yeah, good stuff. And it's good to hear that our title of can save you millions isn't just hyperbole. It's actually, it's been proven in the past to save that amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, large organizations can get lost in the rush, if you like, or the never-ending need to ship something, and the relentless timetables, and we've got to keep going, and that's not uncommon in games or in lots of other sectors. But the tools are in a position just to give you that clue or that warning or that hint or that bit of direction about what you're leaving behind in your work, you know. And the skills and knowledge understanding is quite profound when you see old code that the product is relying on, and then realize that none of the original authors of that code are still at the company. You know, it really should, you know, maybe not ring an alarm bell, but it should be something that is then dealt with, or you know.
Yeah, no, fascinating. Thank you, Dave. Dan, you mentioned before we actually started the webinar that one of the most memorable experiences that you've had working at Endava was when you had to help an internal team take on legacy code from a company that had been acquired. Can you explain a bit about why that was such a good experience for you?
Yeah, actually, that's the third case that I presented. And
oh, right. Okay.
in the presentation, I actually focused on the fact that, okay, we gained the client's trust and we delivered reports and on and on. But the part that really made such fond memories for me was the fact that I was working daily with people that would see the benefits of the work that I do. They would be coming up with question is that I had an interview with the team, and they said that over the last 6 months, they didn't have changes at all in that part of the system. And I would be able to say, okay, that's not quite. Like 3 months ago, there were like 25 changes that affected 100 or something files by 5 developers. Well, what happened back then? And actually, it was not ill intent. Somebody actually forgot about that situation, and it was something that was going over and over every year. Or the fact that the tool that I showed with the knowledge graph with 10,000 nodes, actually they came back 3 months later saying, okay, we use your very small HTML application with some JavaScript that was doing a 3D graph to explore how we could re-architect the entire system. And we realized that we would be able to tell them that this capability, this needs information from this other capability, because we could see the connection not only in the code, but also in the database. So it was those kind of things that really made it such a pleasant experience for me, for seeing the actual beneficiaries of the assessment, the technical team, not just management at a table discussing over money. But in the end, it's actually, as Chris said it and Dave said it, it's very hard to get the bottom, the facts that are coming from the code base itself, and then are bubbling up into documentation and in interviews with people.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you, Dan. One of the questions has been asked about from Christina. Will this recording be made available offline? Yes, it will. We're recording the webinar and it'll be up on, I think, GI.biz very soon, and through Endava as well. So we'll keep you posted on that. Finally, Thomas, I'm going to ask you a little bit, because your kind of field, I suppose, is XR and VR. So what are some of the code issues that you've experienced that are kind of particular to that, to XR?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. XR is definitely very related to games, because a lot of the engines, the way of development, the complexity of the interactions are similar to games. But there is probably a differentiator in how fast-paced the hardware, the SDK, and software library development still is. It really changes on like almost every half year what's current, and that makes it quite tricky to maintain and support older generations of hardware. But you're under a lot more pressure to change to more recent versions of engines, tools, third-party SDKs that you're implementing. So that makes it quite challenging. And again, even though some projects are more in the prototype and MVP area, there are also platforms being built. Like if you think about metaverse and things like that.
Yeah.
I'll give you 2 examples. One is from a project that we have ourselves, where we work with 50 HoloLenses, and and of course you tell, you say, don't update to new operating system versions because it might break stuff.
Yeah.
But then it happens, you know, and then years later you have to look into it and see where are the problems coming from, you know, like where are the relations. Another example I want to give is with the recent news of Allspace VR being shut down by Microsoft. It's sometimes difficult to understand for an audience because VR always seems new, but it does have quite some history. And Allspace VR was over 8 years old as a platform already. So and you could see already since the Microsoft acquisition, it did slow down with new features coming in there and all that. And it's from outside view is of course speculation why that happened. But it was already mentioned in news also that a lot of it was the legacy code. It was very difficult for Microsoft to maintain all the features that were in there, the ways you logged in, you sign up, and all that, the different hardwares, and they were often very forward going with this platform and supporting certain, you know, face tracking features or things like that. But then you have more and more things to support and more edge cases, and that makes it very difficult. So code assessment and tools like this could help there at many places. First, of course, when Microsoft first acquired it in 2017, they could have, maybe they did, I obviously don't know, they could have made a very extensive assessment of this, but also making a decision of continuing development, it does show you how critical is this really, or can you just you know, shut down a couple of things quite easily by excluding certain features, or are those dependencies so heavily ingrained that it's very difficult to really keep the development and the platform going. Yeah. So it is similar in many ways, but it's also different in others, especially with the fast pace of hardware development.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Cool. Good stuff. We've got a question from our audience from anonymous attendee, keeping secret. Is Chronos a product tool made by Endava? Is it mainly a tool on top of the data metadata you get from analyzing the code repositories, or is it something else or something more? Who wants to take that one?
I think I can take that one.
Yeah, cool.
So of course we use tools, as you've seen from Dan's presentation. We do use tools. We need tools to do our job. Chronos is built inside Endava. So but it's one of the tools that we are using. Software assessment, as we see it and as we do it for our clients, is a service. It means that we do use tools to get the data. We do use a certain combination or proprietary tools to extract the data in a safe way and in a transparent way. But the real benefit, it's actually the brains of the consultants with years and years of experience that actually look at the data, interpret the data, and come with recommendations. So it's not a tool that generates reports. It's more than that. We do have reports and we do have the graphs as you've seen them, but the consultants are the ones that listen to the client, understand the scope. What's the scope of that? What do they want to know? What do they want to focus on? And that's what we go there and get out of it. So it's a service that uses tools.
Yes, including Chronos. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Good stuff.
If I may add, actually it started as an approach on how we would see that it needs to be done. It is the brainchild of one of our colleagues, Radu Marinescu. He's coming from, he has years and years of experience in doing software assessment. He has one of the most cited books on quality metrics for object-oriented programming. You can also get more insights into it from this perspective.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm going to ask a couple of questions now. So I was going to ask about the cost. So, I mean, can you share anything about the cost of the assessment? Because I'm sure we've got some small to medium and every size of games company on the webinar today. So, is this affordable for every kind of games company? Who wants to take that one?
Okay. Should I answer that one?
Well, of course, Roxana. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're the
Okay.
star now, so you carry on.
Yeah, I will just talk for the rest of the time. So,
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
So if it's affordable, yes. And I'm not saying that just to fill in the time, but it's actually in the profile of the clients that come to us. The most important thing that I would say, so it doesn't matter like the size of the company, it matters like the size of the code base that you have and as well as the scope. What we try to do is to actually help our clients, no matter if they are small, no matter the budget, we can get them some really valuable information with this assessment. Prices vary a lot, but we actually want to get the value for what the client or the prospective client needs, what is his scope. But we are seeing, various ranges in terms of size.
So basically just have a conversation with you about cost and, depending on what the project is and the time and all that.
Yeah.
And sorry, I don't know.
I was just going to add something there. These things are only expensive if you just treat them as costs. So there's a return on the investment, right? So and it's the reporting process and the way that we hand the information back should make it pretty clear if like where improvement will reduce further expenditure and that kind of thing. So it would be wrong to think of it just as an expense or something that doesn't have a return attached to it, because the return is quite fundamental to the reporting process. If we didn't tell you where you could improve, then there would be no benefit. So there's a lot of focus on that element of the reporting.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you, Roxana and Dave, for answering that. Again, if you've got any questions you want to ask about this, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, so we can try and squeeze them in. I was going to ask about the sort of time-saving elements. And, do you have any examples of companies that have done software assessments using just interviews and documentation versus this consultancy service? Does it save time? Who wants to go for this one? Roxana is always up for it, I'm sure. Answer the question. Or Dave, do you want to have a go at this one?
Yeah, so
or Dan.
Yeah. So I think the
I'll give it a first answer, and then Roxana and Dave, you can fill in. So for many years, I played the role of software architect within Endava and for the customers that we've worked with. And sometimes I was asked to do a review of this code base. Can you look at this code base? And yes, I would do it just without having something like Chronos before. And you always wanted to have those discussions, and then you would look at the documentation. And I actually had slides in the original deck where I would say, okay, the discussions are misleading, not for real intent, just because people forget or that's not on top of their head. Documentation is either up to date or completed. You don't really have both at the same time. And you really want to look inside the code. And what you do, you start browsing the code, but then you can just look at some snippets and you don't really see like the painful parts. If you know to look at the key parts, then you might find something, but you don't have the guarantee that it's a complete overview. Static code analysis, they're great tools just because they get you metrics on the quality, the complexity, the duplication, and so on. But they don't provide an interpretation. They don't do this, the bubbling up or the finding like relationship between this perspective and this other perspective.
Yeah, Roxana, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just a note on one then said, it saves you time. I think it saves you time both when assessing something like a system, but also after. I actually used this service in many of my my project and in discoveries when we would have to take over like an product developed by someone else. We had to go there to understand what's happening. We had to ramp up fast and also be mindful of the risks. And it is a habit of mine to use this assessment in the discoveries because it helps the team, as Dan said, and it helps having conversations early about the risks that we identify. You don't work, I don't know, 1-2 months, you reach a part of the code and then surprise, surprise, someone did something there that will impact you. So it does save time on on either side of a software development, either assessment or actually development.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Dave?
Thank you. Yeah, Dave?
I think Dave...
Yeah, so I mean, prior to us having things like Chronos, I would have said that software assessments were one, a little subjective, and two, what you got out of them was a little anecdotal. So to some degree, what Chronos does is turn everything into tested factual output. So rather than, because programmers sometimes have learned to do the same thing, but in different ways. So, the code is picking up, you can observe something in the code. It doesn't look right to you because you learned to do that somehow you learned to do that differently. So all that stuff is removed, all that subjectivity is removed. And it's a really hard and fast empirical set of numbers that says this is the state that you're in. It's not debatable, it's not making it up, it isn't subjective, it's not being difficult, it's this is what it is. And it's easier then for consultants like me and Chris to come to the right conclusions off a very hard factual set of information rather than a more subjective feel about something.
Yeah, good stuff.
I think, isn't that, I mean, the games industry's got very good over the last 10, 15 years of being data-driven. Analytics. We now take that for granted, that we don't, people pick on games, they decide what they're going to do, they do a lot of analysis to understand how a game performs. This is just another part of that, and being data driven at the code level as well as at the performance level is absolutely key. And just like analytics has allowed games companies to better understand how their games perform and why they should perform well or badly, this does the same thing at the code level. And it's just that next step in better understanding how things do, because we can do the analytics and we can understand what's going on. So I think it's almost a natural evolution of where the industry's gone. And as Dave said, it's something that's now taken for red in other industries. It's just now bringing this into the games industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is there any difference or like increases of chances of code defects in different types of games? So games as a service, or console games, PC games, mobile. Are there any differences, or more opportunities for mistakes and code defects?
I think one of the parts is the fact that these games now last longer. So games as a service, historically, if you go back 20 years, we built games and then built another game and another game and another game. So actually, we were rebuilding, and especially with the console evolutions, we were often rebuilding games. The console evolution would force us to rebuild the code base every 5 years just because of that. Now with the core tech being much more consistent, we've kind of gone beyond those complex console evolutions to something that's much more consistent, being ARM or x86. And the fact that games last 5, 10, 15, 20, like Hamza said, 20 years, that we now have to support games much longer. So games as a service, which is really what games are now, means that we have much more legacy code. And so we have to better understand how that code evolves.
Yeah, another way of interpreting this is that this process would essentially make code reuse much, much more viable. The idea that code is going to be carried forward between games on the basis that it's well structured, it's not overly complex, it's well documented. All that stuff would just allow you then to contemplate saying, well, maybe we don't need to rewrite certain things again. We can carry the code forward. We know that it's in good condition. We know that it's modern and robust and fit for purpose and well designed and modular and all the other things we would want in a code base. And we know that because these tools tell us that that's the situation that we're in. Therefore, let's not rewrite something. Let's carry this forward and use it again, and maybe even use it a third time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's another aspect I would like to mention. With games as a service and live games and the support, often it's also that the ownership of the code changes from the original development and feature team to the team that supports it over a longer time, and that's actually also could be a breaking point. Even though of course you have measures to transition from one team to another. But still, that developer, that lead developer, might already be on the next project.
Yeah, absolutely. Hamza, do you have anything to add to that? Get you involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you now hear my voice?
We can. Fantastic.
Yes. Yes. I think it absolutely makes sense. I think what Chris said about being able to use a quantifiable means of measuring the quality and the resilience of code is a natural evolution of the nature of the games industry. It is actually quite mathematical. It's not just the coding side which is mathematical, but the commercial side which is quite mathematical. And I think again from a management perspective, having that view crystallized in the form of the metrics that Dan shared is invaluable. And knowing how quickly the games industry tends to take up all things numerical. If Endava does its job right, hopefully in the next few years we can see. Hopefully, should see a lot of game CEOs and managers picking up these data points and making the right decisions based on them. The same way they do it right now on things like daily active users and ARPUs and so on and so forth. Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time today. A huge thanks to Dan, to Roxana, Dave, Hamza, Chris and Thomas for their insights today on the Endava code assessment. I think, Dan, you're going to post a slide of how to get in contact with the team at Endava to discuss this. Yeah. So it's games@endava.com if you want to get in touch with them and have a discussion about having your code assessed. Great. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this webinar and it will be available to view again shortly. But thanks to you all for tuning in today and asking questions as well. You can catch up with the latest news and features on GamesIndustry.biz. But until the next webinar, thank you for joining us and see you soon. Cheers. Bye. Bye.